Evening all, and welcome to the webinar on Portadown Flood Alleviation Scheme hosted by CIWEM Northern Ireland Branch. This event is scheduled to start at 5 p.m. We usually just give it a few minutes to let people get logged in, and we'll commence in the next 2 to 3 minutes. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on Portadown Flood Alleviation Scheme. This is part of the CIWEM Flood Resilience and Adaptation Series, and is hosted by CIWEM Northern Ireland Branch. Next slide, John, please. So just some housekeeping before we commence is this webinar event will be recorded. We put recordings up of the events on the CIWEM webpage on YouTube, and we have permission from the speakers and presenters this evening to do so. So please keep a link, an eye out for the link that will be posted in the next few days. If you experience any technical issues and need assistance, please raise your hand and use the chat feature on Zoom to let us know what the problem is and what help is required. If you have any problem assessing the chat, please use the Q&A. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. If you would like to put a question or make a comment about the talk, please use the Q&A facility on Zoom as we go out throughout the presentation. Chat should be for technical issues only. And when asking your question, we please ask you to state which speaker you would like to address the question in hand. There is 1 hour CPD attributed to this webinar. However, we do not provide CPD certificates, and this is not CPD accredited training. Next, John, please. So just a wee bit about CIWEM. CIWEM is the Royal Chartered Professional Body and independent charity. Our vision is a world in which professionalism and excellence build connections to inspire widespread, impactful water and environmental solutions. And on screen, you'll see several links to the CIWEM homepage, membership, which we're always trying to grow through young members on all the regions, especially in the north here. And also there's a link to the CIWEM policies if you'd like to chase up a look at that at a later date. So, just before I hand over to the speakers, just a wee bit of a summary on what this evening is about. So this is the 4th technical talk in the CIWEM program. As you mentioned, it's about flood alleviation scheme at Portadown. It's a lifeline for a town that has been identified as significant flood risk area. This webinar will explore the flood risk assessment, optioneering, scheme development and construction delivery program of this significant project, which includes approximately 10 kilometres of flood defences. What can we expect from this evening's webinar? Hopefully we touch on an in-depth review of the Portadown flood risk, insights into the development and optioneering of the alleviation scheme, overview of the construction delivery program, and discussion on flood walls, embankments, floodgates, and other defence measures. So as part of the panel this evening, we have John Colgan, Amey Project Engineer. We have Mark Lindining, DfI Deputy Project Sponsor. We have Michael Fox from DfI, Head of Capital Project Unit and Project Sponsor. We have Eugene McClone, Amey Project Manager. And we have Warren Bowl, Amey Principal Designer. So we'll hand you over now to John and Mark to commence the presentation this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for attending this evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity and the invitation to come along this evening and tell you a bit about the Portadown Flood Alleviation Scheme. Just to start with, I'm going to sort of set out the agenda for this evening. Myself, I will cover the strategic context, scheme location, scheme objectives, a bit of background into the flooding history of Portadown, leading into the development of the feasibility study and how that has shaped and been changed by various aspects to get us to where we're at now. At that stage, I'll hand over to my colleague John from Amey, and he'll talk about the flood risk itself, how we identified that, the impacted sites, design proposals, environmental constraints, challenges, and then we'll give us a bit of an in-depth overview of one of the major sites within the scheme, finishing off with a quick run-through of the project timeline. So, as previously mentioned, my name is Mark Glendinning. I'm a senior engineer with Rivers Directorate. Just sort of by way of introduction to Rivers Directorate, Rivers Directorate are part of the Department for Infrastructure within Northern Ireland. We are under the banner of Water and Departmental Delivery. Rivers Directorate, which was formerly known as DfI Rivers, and previous to that even Rivers Agency, is the lead statutory drainage and flood defence authority for Northern Ireland. Our vision is to manage the flood risk and to facilitate social, economic and environmental development of Northern Ireland, both now and in the future. Our overall aim is to reduce the risk to life and damage to property from flooding from the rivers and the sea, and to do so in a sustainable manner. And currently we are responsible for 500 kilometres of flood risk management infrastructure that has an estimated net value of over £1 billion. So just by way of setting the strategic context around the Portadown flood alleviation scheme, I think it's best to start at the start, and that's essentially the legislation that is the starting point for any major flood alleviation scheme delivered by DfI Rivers Directorate. So essentially, the European Floods Directive came into play in 2007, and the Water Environment Floods Direction Regulations Northern Ireland 2009 transposed that EU Floods Directive. Despite the fact Brexit has happened and we're no longer part of the European Union, that Floods Directive still applies in Northern Ireland currently. Right at the heart of that directive is the ambition and the desire to protect communities from flooding, from the risk of flooding, and to help identify flood risk and deal with flood risk on a catchment-wide basis. The directive has three distinct preparatory stages. The first of these is the preliminary flood risk assessment, which is known as the PFRA. And this was an assessment of flood risk at a national scale, identified basically strategic level flooding across Northern Ireland. Each member state was required to do this, and this was completed back in 2011 by DfI Rivers at that time. The PFRA for Northern Ireland identified 20 areas of significant flood risk across Northern Ireland. Of those 20 areas, Portadown was ranked 5th in terms of possible consequences and impact of flooding, both from fluvial and pluvial sources. And that was the starting point for this scheme. The second stage of the directive was then flood hazard and risk mapping, which again was completed back in the early 2000s and 10s. And finally, the third stage was the flood risk management plans. The objective of these flood risk management plans was to set out the measures that may be taken to address the flooding identified within the preliminary flood risk assessments. And through development of these FRMPs, as they're known, Rivers Directorate devised a concept or a way of thinking about dealing with the flood risk that exists in Northern Ireland and potentially exists in the future. Within Rivers Directorate, we refer to that as 3 Ps. 3 Ps being prevention, protection, and preparedness. Prevention relates to plan and advisory role that we have within the department, and this is essentially trying to avoid inappropriate development within areas prone to flood risk or that may be prone to flood risk in the future. The second P, protection, refers to management of the current flood risk measures that we have in place, maintenance of those, and also delivery of capital projects to protect communities at risk of flooding, again, both in present day situations and into the future. And finally, the third P is preparedness, and this essentially refers to emergency planning and flood response issues as well, and also engagement with local communities to create flood resilient communities. Further to this, in terms of strategic context, the programme for government was agreed and has been published recently by the Northern Ireland Executive, and this scheme helps to contribute to the achievement of some of the aims within that, including things like creating an environment for better quality of life and investment. And finally, in terms of strategic, the scheme also delivers on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 8, 9, 11 and 13. In terms then of geographic context, for those of you who maybe don't know, Portadown is a large town in Northern Ireland. It's within County Armagh and sits approximately 10 kilometres due south of Lough Neagh, which is the major body of water within the middle of Northern Ireland. Portadown itself falls within the area of potential significant flood risk known as the Portadown and Craigavon area, APSFR. As you can see here, that area is outlined by the red on the screen. Within Portadown itself and the APSFR, the River Bann runs essentially straight through the middle of Portadown town and is the main source of flood risk to Portadown and the surrounding area, although there is other tributaries that contribute to the flood risk as well. In relation to the Bann, it is the biggest watercourse within Northern Ireland, and the catchment area at Portadown, when it's combined with the Cusher River, which is a major tributary, equates to over 650 kilometres squared. This spans sort of as far south and slightly beyond Newry to the east and the west of Newry. So as you can see from this graphic on the screen now, it's a significant catchment area, and hopefully that gives some perspective around the extent and the possibility and likelihood of significant flood impact in Portadown itself. Further to all the strategic requirements for investigation of flood risk in Portadown, there has been a significant and long flood history recorded in Portadown, with floods being recorded as far back as the late 70s, early 80s. There's been a number of events through the 90s into the 2000s. Most recently, flooding occurred in Portadown in October, November 2023. This flooding was as a result of extensive and prolonged intense rainfall across Northern Ireland, and essentially the Bann overtopped its banks, spawning floodwaters into Portadown town centre and surrounding areas. Some of the images on here will show the lines on the images, show the River Bann, where the bank line usually is, and hopefully gives again an indication of the scale of the flooding and the issue that there is in Portadown currently. During this event, there was also other localities within Northern Ireland impacted, such as Warrenpoint and Newry as well. So there's an extensive flood history within Portadown, and it has been sort of realised recently as well, which furthered the need for the scheme to be taken forward. As this was the case with all these factors considered, Rivers Directorate decided to progress a feasibility study. This was carried out by RPS back in 2018. The main aim of that study was to appraise the actual flood risk in detail and investigate options which would alleviate the risk of flooding in the event of a 1% annual exceedance probability flood. And this was to include economic viability of these options. So the feasibility study, as they normally do, considered a long list of options, which looked at all potential options. These were then ruled out on various grounds, or ruled in on various aspects, such as technical viability, and a short list was created. And from that short list, a preferred option was borne out. And essentially that was after option analysis. So the preferred option was economically assessed, and it produced a cost-benefit ratio of close to 2 to 1 for the scheme at that size to alleviate the flood risk in a 1% AEP flood. That was completed in 2018. In 2019, Amey, our partner consultant, were appointed to develop the scheme through detailed design, procurement and construction. Roughly at the same time, DfI introduced guidance in relation to allowances for climate change in the future. And this was particularly relevant for Portadown, as within the guidance it set out that all fluvial flood flows for scheme design should have an additional 20% added to them. So this then had to be incorporated into the design of the scheme. And essentially the application of that guidance identified a further 80 properties at risk of flooding in this new design event. These were spread across the existing sites identified in the feasibility. However, we also identified further 4 sites at risk in Portadown, and essentially it increased the scheme length by approximately 2.5 kilometres, as well as adding the 4 sites to it, and also resulted in a higher flood level and therefore increased the height of some of the walls that were currently proposed. So at that point then, the scheme objective changed, which had a massive bearing on the scheme progress and the scheme design. Essentially, the new objective was to produce and develop a scheme that would reduce the impact of potential fluvial flooding from the Bann and its tributaries in the event of a 1% AEP flood with climate change allowance, commonly referred to as the 1% AEP plus CC flood. This was the brief that was sent to Amey. At this point now, I'm going to hand over to John, and he can run you through the further stages of the scheme, from design to where we're at currently and where we're going. Thank you.
Thanks much, Mark. I suppose just to pick up, I'll take you through a bit of the timeline, really an understanding of the scheme, what we've done, and I suppose currently where we're at. An update of the baseline model was undertaken in 2019 after receiving a brief from DfI. And really what we've done here was we used the integrated catchment model to really understand the flood mechanisms within Portadown and update it to Q100 plus climate change standard level of protection for the Portadown area. From that, there was subsequent engineering solutions output in relation to each of the locations of the proposed defences, and really the key findings from these from this assessment was included on. So from the model, we found that 385 commercial and residential properties were affected from this standard level of protection, which is a 1% annual exceedance probability, and that equated to roughly 10 kilometres of defences and protected a total of 20 number sites within the Portadown area. As you can see here, these are noted in the visual through the black lines. So Portadown extends from a 5 kilometre radius from the centre. It's estimated damage there at £45 million, with a preferential construction value of £55 million, with a BCR which is above unity of 1.22. So the scheme design, really understanding what the flood risk and the modelling that we have outputted from this. So the River Bann has a number of tributaries associated. Probably looking this in detail within the Portadown town centre is the main Corkin River here, denoted in green, that discharges into the main River Bann. I suppose where we're at here, located in the visual, is the centre of Portadown itself. Probably key locations such as People's Park, Irwin's Mill, Foundry Street within the area. So from this really identified, there's a variant of flood depths, really ranging from 300 mil right up to greater than 2.4 metres. So a significant flood depths in various areas within the scheme. So within these 380 properties, it's wide ranging, not alone through the centre of Portadown, what's shown in the visual here, which is both residential and commercial, but the wider area through leisure and through agricultural properties as well. So basically, site impacts, to really give you an understanding of the impact and the benefit that we're providing to the Portadown area, again within the centre here of the Corkin River that discharges into the Bann. you can really see the before, the baseline of what currently is for the standard level of protection, to what the protection that we will provide post-scheme through the centre of Portadown. So really, the red line denotes the proposed flood defence alignments and really gives you a visual then for the pre and post-scheme scenarios to reduce that wider risk within the scheme. So take you through a few of the scheme design proposals. Each site really did pose a variety of challenges to us. Each site has its own constraints, its own uses, and different variety of landowners, as well as key stakeholders. So I suppose to take you through here, it equates to roughly 10 kilometres of defences. These are broken into various sectors. So 7.4 kilometres of steel sheet piles, really dependent on the ground conditions that do vary throughout the 21 number sites. 2.35 kilometres of secant and CFA pile walls, 240 metres of flood embankments, 65 metres of demountable flood barriers, 30 metres of glass panels, 26 number floodgates, which is inclusive of only 500 flat valves throughout the 20 number schemes, and localised landscaping. So each of these different construction types really at each of the sites is really chosen depending on the ground conditions, its environment, and how it's best suited for the end user. I suppose from the model that we did undertake, subsequent or alongside that, we done an environmental statement, which was issued in 2023 to all the statutory consultees and the public, really outlining all the environmental considerations that we have provided for each of the 21 sites. And it went out for any comment from them consultees and the public, so we could take on board then and integrate into our subsequent designs for the 20 number sites. I suppose from that, we undertook an apiculturalist report, which was completed in 2023. The reason for that was really to gain an understanding of the number of trees within the scheme extents, and I suppose the health of them trees as well, and where we can minimise our potential impact of them during construction. I suppose from the main environmental statement, we did do an addendum to that statement, more or less just for any design changes that had occurred from our preliminary design that was in the early stages of 21 and year 22. So I suppose what we're doing currently within the scheme to implement these environmental considerations is first of all carbon. So what we're doing is really a carbon impact tool, really a comparison of the baseline flood damages for 1% annual exceedance probability in relation to the construction of the proposed defences, and really that we're having a positive impact there for the carbon footprint of the scheme going forward. Second of all, there's biodiversity really, and what we're looking at there is landscaping plans, and what we've done is produced riparian planting of native species, and these again I suppose are best suited to each site and are chosen really to suit each landowner and each environment where that flood defence lies. And the third is, I suppose, as what we're doing as a team with both DfI and Amey, is social impact days. I suppose you can see here through the images here, we did partake in a social impact day in conjunction with the local council and John O'Dowd, then the infrastructure minister, to take planting of nearly 1,200 trees there within Portadown. Again, really reducing the carbon impact that we're potentially having within the Portadown scheme. And I suppose looking forward within 2025, we have more organised, and that's really evident through our kind of stakeholder engagement and communication strategy for the scheme, that we have a close relationship with them bodies. I suppose to take you through a few of the scheme challenges and the project constraints. First of all, really, is the landowner stakeholder agreements, the future maintenance and access, the environmental concerns, the social impact that we're potentially having of our designs, really the engineering challenges, the ground conditions that we've encountered, and then lastly is really the cost. So probably to take you through a few of them. Landowner and stakeholder agreements. This would really need to secure permissions from the landowners and stakeholders, particularly key ones there like HED, with the listed buildings that are currently within the Portadown area, and understanding what their requirements are with them and really implementing them within our designs. And then second of all, it's really the visual effect and reducing the disruption that our defences will have post-construction as well, where we can, which I'll highlight further within the presentation here. Probably further to that, we did an extensive consultation with different MLAs and councillors, local businesses, Chamber of Commerce, service providers, really key stakeholders like Northern Iron Water, BT Openreach, sport organisations, local community groups, land and property owners, and really just the general public through our public information days. So given the scale of the project over the 21 sites, I suppose there is one particular site that does cover a lot of the constraints that we have seen in one way or another, which is probably as what we reference in the scheme as Bowling Green, just off Meadow Lane. And if anyone's familiar with Portadown, with the Tesco shopping area and local proximity to that. So the site is situated within an area managed by 3 key landowners, each with really different land uses. The key constraints really identified during the options phases were, I suppose, first of all, was the social impact, really the connectivity, really to ensure the uninterrupted pedestrian access that you can see in this visual here between the existing towpath, the River Bann, and the public green area that is used for public events. Second of all would be the community access, really to maintain that access to the green space for public and community events, ensuring that the space remains usable and accessible. And the third is pedestrian access to nearby businesses, so we're not having a negative impact on them post-construction. Really safeguarding the pedestrian access to maintain that local convenience. The second would be any environmental concerns, I suppose noted here, which the hatched line with the mature trees that is situated along the towpath, the 25 number mature trees that are, I suppose, of key standing within the Portadown town centre. And the third is really the landowner stakeholder agreements required and the liaison with the landowner with them through the council, the bowling club and Tesco, really to understand what their key requirements are for the site, and as I said, among other sites within the Portadown area. So I suppose to take you in of, I suppose, options considered within the Bowling Green area. During the initial discussions with the landowner and key stakeholders, we did compile an options report that really evaluated 5 potential solutions, and 2 which I'll talk through now, which were shortlisted for further consideration. Option 1 here, probably shown denoted by the red line, proposed a 450 linear metre defence, shortlisted primarily for its relatively short length and the reduced number of affected landowners. However, there was major concerns associated with this alignment. First of all was the connectivity, limited access between the towpath and the River Bann. And suppose after our key discussions with the council, which we had outlined within our communication strategy, we identified them as key stakeholders. With that they want to maintain the connection for the public access, and that was key through their new strategy of bringing people back to the river with uninterrupted views from the existing walkways. The second was the existing mature trees along the towpath, and really our objective was really to minimise the impact of the proposed flood wall on its surroundings. And how we done that is we undertook an agricultural report, understanding what the type of trees are there, their health, and what ways we can optioneer around that and utilise the existing floodplain where we can. So following this, this really got us into a proposed option, and what the proposed option was here is noted in white, which moved the defence further away from the river embankment, but did increase their overall length. So based on the agricultural report, it was advised that we stay away from the trees and really maintain that visual within the area. And so from here, you can see in the visual of, I suppose, option 1, which really was at the top of the river embankment. And what our preferred design now would be is moving it for 25 meters further back, both increasing floodplain and reducing any potential visual impact that we'll have within the area. So to take a bit in depth of a cross section of what this will look like and plan, from the 25 meters offset, we are retaining the mature trees, increasing the floodplain, and again, reducing the overall visual impact that we're having in the local surrounding area, whilst being considerate then to the bowling green, basically as shown on the left as well, again, through our stakeholder and engagement with them. So this is just a bit of a visual of what we're doing pre and post scheme, which is basically what we've done here is we have provided a bit of a flood wall. Key challenges probably within this from an engineering point of view was the ground conditions. I suppose from moving away from the river embankment, which is a soft alluvium clay, moving towards 25 meters from the embankment as more cohesive soil. So what that done was it moved us away from reduced our pile depth, and basically what we've done there is from optionated from a sheet pile to a CFA pile, in this case with an RC wall to the substructure with cladding then to suit the local environment and anti-kind coping to reduce any safety impacts in the potentially having from the public. So construction method here, just looking at Portadown itself, this is the current green area within the Portadown seen on the visual to the right. What we're proposing here through our probably key stakeholder liaison with the council is really maintaining their access. Two accesses here are pedestrian access and vehicular access for the public events that they do run at different times of the year. And how we've done that is up and over ramps to maintain that with local landscape and then to soften the approach to the flood wall. And second of all is through a floodgate through any vehicular access that they need to set up any sort of marquees or anything like that for their public events in the future. So what we've done here is we've tried to look at the local surrounding area, identify the landowner and understand their requirements, which we've then taken on board then and included within our designs. So project timeline, I suppose where are we at the moment? So we've taken it from a project brief in 2019 that we received from DfI. We really updated the hydraulic modelling for that 1% annual exceeding climate change. And from that then, we done our preliminary design in March 2021, concluded, and our environmental statement then in 2023, which basically outlined any constraints that we had within the project. And then subsequent to that, our public information days that we had within Portadown. Just really to give an understanding to the public of exactly the sites that we are providing flood defences at, and let them understand then and have an input then into the different cladding aspects that we are doing at the different sites. The second of all then is detailed design. I suppose we are concluding that towards the end of this month and proceeding into procurement in June of this year, and then through to detailed design in 2026 to 2032. I suppose just due to the significant size and scale of the scheme, we are proposing to have a three-phased construction approach. Each phase really predicted to be 2 years long. And what we find with the benefit of a phased approach is really reduced budget risks. We can develop a lessons learned obtained really from each phase that will benefit subsequent phases 2 and 3. And how we've done this is really evaluated the onset of flooding, both from what the modelling that we've undertaken, and I suppose from the understanding of the flooding that did happen in 2023, that I did partake in and do a walkover within them 3 days of the flooding to really understand the kind of the flooding mechanisms that were occurring there, the flood depths and the flood extents, and really relaying then to our hydraulic model, which really gave us confidence then in the hydraulic outputs from that, alongside the sensitivity checks that did take place from the subsequent flooding events that Mark had mentioned in previous years. So just like you, thanks very much for your time, and be open to any questions.
Thank you very much, John and Mark there. John, if you could just maybe put on that slide that says the CIWEM events there, so we can just maybe show it while we're taking some of the questions, if possible. There's a couple of questions here now that I think they've been answered written response, but I might just get to go through them again. So the first question here is there any backwater effect on flood levels in the scheme area for Lough Neagh when its level is high? I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah.
So yeah, within the within the modelling that's been conducted for the design event, the level, which at the minute is, I can't just remember the specific level, is well above the upper limit of where the loch levels should be regulated. So that has been decided previous to Amey's involvement. That was decided as an appropriate level to deal with backwater effects from the loch during a significant flood event. So yes.
Thank you. We have another one here is, how is preparedness being considered in this flood alleviation scheme?
So through the works of our emergency planning the department or unit, we regularly engage with and reach out to local communities. At this stage, we have reached out through councillors to certain community groups, etc., to liaise with them about the flood alleviation scheme. And ultimately, what happens in most instances is the opportunity to create RCRG, which is a residence group, flood resilience group, that at some stage will be offered to the people of Portadown once the scheme is sort of sufficiently developed, and that's based on a desire from the local community as well. We are happy to set that up and facilitate it and provide resources, etc., to that. And that has happened across the country, and that's something that will be considered going forward for Portadown.
Thank you. Another one here, and I think Eugene, you've maybe typed the response here. I'm not sure if everybody can see the type response, but I'll just read it out. His question is, any considerations given to NFM opportunities in the upper catchment, given a lot of it is agricultural?
Yeah, I suppose what we've tried to do there within the scheme is we've tried to utilise the natural floodplain where we can, and how we've done that is we've tried to offset our defences from the River Bann itself and the Topple Bank. I suppose a good example of that would have been the Bowling Green. So there is different areas on the upstream extent that we are utilising the existing floodplain through the agricultural fields. So what the scheme is doing, it's not impacting them, but it's maintaining that natural floodplain whilst protecting the houses.
I think it's also maybe worth mentioning there as well that the feasibility study did include natural flood risk management techniques as part of the longer list of options, and it was ruled out on technical viability. Two factors leading to that, probably the first one being the scale of the flood issue that sort of results from the ban and the catchment itself. So basically, the scale of the intervention from NFM there would have to be fairly significant. And the second aspect to that would be the current lack of policy and legislation for the department to implement those kind of measures. So those two together essentially made NFM not a viable option for reduction of the 1% plus 20, sorry, the 1% AEP plus 20% flood flow. However, it is something as we go forward and climate change predictions change, it will be something that if there's further interventions needed, that again will be given, the consideration that it deserves.
Perfect. I think that's pretty similar to the quick response that Eugene has provided there too. Another one there was just that was there any scope for property flood resilience measures to be considered to help protect the 385 properties identified? Now I know Eugene has typed that one. I don't know whether Eugene wants to take that one. There is a response here, but I'm not sure whether everybody can see the response.
Sorry, Paul, what question was that one again?
Was there any scope for property flood resilience measures to be considered to help protect the 385 properties identified?
Yeah, the response I added into that one was that yes, there is one property as part of the scheme out of the 21 sites that we have proposed to use property level protection. I had noted in there that the scheme that we're running through with DfI currently only allows us to provide property level protection up to 600 mil. But the other point being that the measures are generally temporary measures and they do require barriers and to be deployed in times of flood. There was an answer came back there that if PFR can go higher than the 600 mil mark, of course, but that is subject to structural engineers' acceptance and flood heights, etc.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eugene. Another question we have here is, what framework was this scheme procured through?
Michael, do you want to take that one for us?
Yeah, sorry, I just unmuted myself there. So the design and procurement and the update to the feasibility that Amey carried out, that was delivered through Amey, have been procured as our partner contract. So they are our partner and consultant. So they were awarded that section of the works. The construction element of it will be out to an open tender.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. We have another question here is, were there any possible detriments in the downstream of the river studied during modelling due to increase in the depth of the flow in the river due to addition of flood defences?
Yeah, I suppose what we've done within our model as well is sensitivity checking, and in that sense is basically what displacement of flooding that we are or potentially are having by putting these flood defences in. What we have done is we have allowed for that within our defences, whether it be increased heights within our flood defences, but all that being it's minimal within the whole scheme itself.
Just to add that, John, that we're obviously finding that the flooding mechanism as it passes through sort of the main Portadown and the properties that we are protecting, it generally floods out in the open floodplain, which already floods, obviously. But yeah, the detriment that's to be spoken about there is perhaps a few millimeters increase over a vast area. So it's not a big impact at all.
Thank you. There's no more questions there at the minute, but if anyone's got any questions, don't be afraid to put them in, and we'll give it a minute or so there. If not, then we'll put it to a close. John, if you could just go back one more slide, please, just to the yeah, perfect. Thank you. Oh, we have a question. So the question is, will there be any more flood alleviation schemes coming soon?
Yeah. So DfI have a full basically portfolio of capital schemes that they're working on at various stages. Portadown currently is probably the most advanced in terms of where we're at with it. There is other schemes to follow on. Essentially, we will be taking forward and considering all of the 20 significant flood risk areas over the next coming years. In terms of timeframes of when they're coming or what's coming next, I can't confirm at the minute. But there will be further investment into flood risk infrastructure on behalf of DfI Rivers over the next few years. Yes.
I think just to add, any schemes that are nearing a procurement or procurement ready or on the ISNI website. Many of our major schemes will be on the ISNI pipeline, so keep an eye on that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Well, I think that's it. All the questions we've been provided a very detailed answering, so it's much appreciated. So you can just see on the presentation there we have at the minute, and we have some events coming up in CIWEM, mainly for ourselves in the Northern Ireland branch. We have our annual dinner coming up now, which will be on the 8th of May in Titanic Hotel, Belfast, and it'll be going live shortly. And as you can see, there's several other events happening across all the branches in CIWEM. We have the Flood and Coastal Conference exhibition, which will be an in-person event. We have the Republic of Ireland branch as a nature-based solution experience. We also have the Be Flood Ready, which is happening in April. And on the 8th of April, we also have the West Midlands, East Midlands, and Presidential team. And we also have an event on the major event, which is the Urban Drainage Group. So just before we go, I just want to say a special thank you to the speakers and the panelists this evening. It's very much appreciated, and it's obviously a project that is did a lot of hard work on, and it takes years to get the information collected and to be delicate in your approach. So it's a very interesting and hands-on scheme. So thank you very much to everybody who presented and answered some questions this evening. Just want to give a shout out to Barbara Woods, who's behind the scenes here. So Barbara is the facilitator for CIWEM and who has put the CIWEM webinar together this evening. So thank you very much, Barbara, for all your help. And finally, just want to thank everybody who dialed in this evening. I think the numbers were good. We had 70+ people on the call this evening. And we really appreciate your continued support for CIWEM and taking time out of your busy evenings, especially on a Thursday evening. Now we have all plenty of other stuff to be out with families and whatnot. So really appreciate all your help and support. And on that now, I just maybe we put this to a close and just for everybody to enjoy the rest of the evening. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.